is the origin of mush? What is the origin of mush?
So, mush is obviously a word that you've heard a lot about. It means an awful lot to a lot of Birr people. I've lived and travelled around the world and I've always used it. People always wonder, where does it come from? Even in Ireland, in Birr, where does it come from? So first of all, where I heard it comes from
was from the McCarthy's itinerants in High Street. They used to use the word mush because that was their own lingo, the travellers. That was their lingo. They have a lingo of their own. The older people
in the 40s seems to be still using it, but as you know, I think mainly because pubs was our main focal point when we were teens. There was bigger crowds in pubs then. There was no social media, so everything's revolved around the pubs.
Or is it an in-between word where they go, oh, mush, you know?
Now, I heard a rumour that it's supposed to mean a mush is a guy that's good with horses. I don't know.
Well, when I was younger, we moved, when I was about 1 or 2, we moved to England for a couple of years.
In London, mush means head, well head. Well head, what are you doing? Well head. But in Birr, we're well mush, what are you doing? In Tuam, it's well sham, what are you doing? Rossplay, you might be a lad.
Well, I can remember when I didn't hear it, and I can remember then when I would be hearing it.
Well, I grew up in Failte and I went to school in Crinkle. So mush for me was always the New York boys, you know what I mean? I was like from the deep south or something.
We actually came across it in a teaching lecture down in Limerick one time. As far as I know, it's a Romanian gypsy word.
Well, I have an interest in different dialects and that, and cant language and that. Well, the word mush itself is as an Anglo gypsy, which would be the gypsy language spoken in England. To be the word that they actually pronounce it more moosh. And they call it mush, how you moosh.
I remember just when I first came across it, I suppose you would always, as a young chap around town, young fella around town, you'd always be looking up to the guys ahead of you and who's cool and who's wearing the coolest gear and stuff. And they started, you could hear this much being involved, and you understood what it was about. And I remember using it at home. I remember my dad stopped me up and he said, you don't use that word.
I suppose the first time I would have heard it would have been my Uncle Kevin, actually, and this would be years ago, maybe 20 years ago. He'd be coming back from town and he'd be telling us a story about something that happened, and he'd be like, oh, there was a mush there, and there was a mush doing this, and I would have been a young lad at maybe 6 or 7, and I would have been, who's a mush, or who is this, or is this a person, a place, or what exactly is it? And you kind of be intrigued then, and then as you get older and you start going into town and you start to meet people around town, you start to hear this the whole time, like, and it becomes something in your subconscious, and you just start using it without even realising it.
I think I first heard the word mush kind of when I was about 9 or 10 years old, kind of around the streets of Birr, sort of where I grew up, around the corner from here. Older lads like maybe
Brendan Nolan down in the GAA field saying, now mush, come on, pull your timber. You know, playing underage hurling with brother Vincent and co down there. But from there on, it's pretty much in every second and third word, like when you're hanging around Birr.
Mush, 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 mush.
Even the story I remember in school, we were probably in 4th class, and the guards came in to give a talk or whatever, and they were looking for questions, and at the end, like, and one lad, you know, pipes up and he's like, hey mush, like, you know, and the guard of course flipped, and he's like, don't ever call a guard mush, don't disrespect the guard by calling him mush. And anyways, the guards left, and the teacher of course was going mad then after, and said to your man, he says 30 lines on the page, don't ever call a guard mush. That's like, you know, stuff like that you just remember from school, and even that early, you know, using the word mush, so all the way up along.
I was talking to another guy from Birr, Jim Murphy. He's based in London for years. I talked to him yesterday, and he tells me that mush is in London in States or head or stuff, you know, and then just as mentioned the barracks where all English people were there, so whether it's connection there or not, I don't know, you know.
But actually, now going back to the first time I ever heard it, just thinking now, I'm a big Only Fools and Horses fan, And when I was in a young guy, 5 or 6, Del Boy uses the word mush several times in it, and that actually probably would be one of the first times I ever heard it. It is kind of a Cockney word as well, I think. So from the Romanian gypsy side of thing to kind of Cockney only fools and horses, that would be where I would associate it with coming from.
And how it came around here initially was just around the corner from, I was reared in Church Street, just around the corner in Cass Street, where Mick Cash lived. And himself and his 2 sons, Pat and the late Pat and Miley, were horse dealers. And at that time, around the end of the 50s, early 60s, there was a big export trade to England in riding horses and ponies for riding schools and that. And a lot of English buyers, horse dealers, come over buying, and they would have been in the horse game. They would have been dealing with a lot of gypsy people and that in England, and they'd have the word mush, and they say, well, mush, how you? So Cash has picked it up from there, and we'd be hanging around the yard that time, and you'd be messing around with horses and that. So there was kind of spread out from there, and anyone around that age at that time, teenagers, it's just the words you picked up and started to use, and then it came into common usage in Birr.
Really kind of know them. You'd be kind of glanced at twice.
I've started calling my sisters mush at home. The odd time you just don't even realise it, kind of, you're doing it. But I don't think girls use it as much. I don't think it would be seen as very, maybe that ladylike to be using it, like. And I've addressed some girls as mush that live outside of town or that, and that wouldn't go down so well either, because it's kind of just, oh, you're one of the lads or something like that, you know. So maybe that's something to do with it. It's a very kind of laddish kind of term to use.
Well, women and men talk different. They hold different conversations, and I could say the women maybe talk for longer and more. But anyway,
well kid, well pal, well sham, well lad, well bud, well mush. You know, it seems to be a lad's thing, is it?
Oh no, you're wrong. Yeah. Girls use mush as well.
I know a few girls who use the word mush, but they only say it to lads. They don't say it to girls. Like, recently, actually, a girl who I was working with, she was down in Birr, and we were telling her about the word mush and that lads call each other mush, and she was like, "Well, what do girls call each other?" I said, "Well, they don't call each other anything. Like, they just call each other by their names." And she suggested that they should call each other lush. Like, so maybe, I don't know, that might catch on, or. I don't think so, but
I spoke to a woman yesterday, Massey Kelly from Birr, and she uses mush. Unbelievable.
You will hear females call the men mush, but you don't tend to hear the ladies call each other it. So I think for me it's a term for the men.
I never heard it used by older people. It'd be used more or less by people who were born from the end of World War II on. You know, my father's generation, or people born prior to the end of the Second World War. I never heard them using it that much. It would have been people that would have been in their teens around 1960 that picked it up.
I'd say it would have a lot to do with the geography of the town. A lot of the people that would have been using it in their 50s would have been living in the town, whereas there's probably not as many people living in the actual town now as there was. It's kind of spread out maybe a bit more, so maybe that's why maybe it's not being used as much, or maybe only by a certain age.
Yeah, so generation wise, I think, in my opinion, it seems to be a 30 to 50 thing, because I mean, I know that, like, my father doesn't use it. He's in his 70s. And I don't kind of really know anyone in their 60s. It seems to start with people maybe in their late 40s, early 50s, and I don't know anybody, like, I know a lot of people between 15 and 20 years old, they don't use it, you know, so maybe it looks to me like the generation is between 20 and 50ish.
Well, nowadays they would be a bit younger than that time, you know, because the younger crowd would hear it being used and they'd probably follow on, but they wouldn't keep it up, the tradition like what we did back that time. You know, my age now, and people in their 60s would keep that as an old tradition going. But the younger lads might say it now and again, but they wouldn't keep it up.
I find that people who are mostly between probably my age, maybe over 25 to 55 maybe, it's that kind of span of people.
Yeah, I would say around my age, like mid to the kind of late 20s would be. I don't know if I hear it as much now with younger fellas and younger girls around the town.
You know, it's mostly kept in Birr, you know. You might say it to a few country lads and then they might take the mick out of you then. Oh, well much. But we kind of keep it, you know, you only really say it to lads either your age or a bit younger. But you wouldn't say it to lads older than you because we're like, you know, what are you doing calling me that? Like, they look a bit weird.
It's kind of a different intimacy, you know what I mean? There's a different intimacy to it. It is an intimacy, you know. There's something endearing about it. When you call someone a mush, it feels like they're, you know, it's like word.
When I lived in New York then for about 6 or 7 years, I started to hear the word being used by a man from Birr there. He's a bartender, and he calls everybody mush, like the local cop up on the street. Well, mush. He calls them all mush. So as a result, everybody that goes in there thinks his name is Mush. So you have people coming in, Greeks, Latinos, African Americans, asking for the drinks, going, "Hey, Mush."
Like there's a mate of mine, Sarah, who lives in Canada. She's in Toronto, and she spent a lot of time in Dublin, but a lot of time around like Birr people. She's been down in Birr out to music sessions with us, and I mean, still to this day, like she'll text me from Toronto, "Well, Mush."
No, it is, because there's a couple of mushes over in Los Angeles too. Brendan Vaughan, Des Barry, God rest his soul, kept it well in the mix over there all the time. So Desi especially. So they're going in for an old cocktail with him on a Friday evening. "Well, Mush, how's the crack?" You know. So always kept it in the mix. Part of keeping you humble, who you are, where you're from. So
you don't know the mush joke. I was able to tell people outside of Birr the mush joke, and they got it. What do you call a room full of Birr people? A mushroom. You haven't heard that? Yeah. God, I've told that a load of places.
Mush is just a one for all kind of term where you can't really go wrong. You're not really offending anyone to say it, and you're not gonna kind of say the wrong name as well. So it's a perfect term there. And we found that in college, people start calling you Mush then. They stop addressing you by your first name when they get to know you. Because you're saying it subconsciously to them nearly every day you see them. "Oh, how are we getting on, Mush?" And they just say, "Oh, the Mush." And it just kind of carries on like that. It's funny, like.
One of those friends actually, he's a fine footballer. He was lucky enough to win a Leinster medal with Westmeath, one of the very rare ones. But he was in England for a while, over in London. And at that time when he was working there, a lot of the Irish chaps who were over there would involve in GAA sports, so they would be playing for different parishes of London. I think he played with Kilburn at the time or whatever, and he would join up. So on a Saturday or a Sunday they would all congregate in Rislip, which is a local ground, a big local ground over there, and there would be GAA matches played. And as ever, you can imagine all over London, those lads coming from all areas to play on the one team, so they wouldn't meet each other, it wouldn't be training, but it was a way for them to connect overseas. But he always tells me a story that he was in the middle of the field one day. We caught this ball about 5 minutes into the game, and this fellow was playing on the right hand side, on the wing, and he kept going, "Mush, mush, 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 mush." When the play finished, he said, "You must be from Birr," he said. And he just couldn't wait to phone me to tell me. He said, "How did you know?" Caught him for the ball, and I just loved it.
It's funny when somebody not from Birr uses the word mush. They know they're in. They know they're loved. You know what I mean? Like there's a mate of mine in Australia, Mark. He uses mush. There's a load of musicians from Dublin. They'll use mush. Like Shane Fitz that played here. He'll just every time he sees me, it's "Well, Mush. How are all the mushes?"
What I have done now, and you can all laugh if you want to, I have my own headstone got now as a sandstone. I got up the mountain. I love sandstones and all like that, and I have a got for my headstone, and I have a fella doing it, putting mush in it, and all would be on my headstone whenever up in the graveyard in Birr is mush and the little walkman, and the arrow pointing the way I'm going, and nothing else. So everybody has their own theory when they die and their own wish, and that's my wish.
If there was a row, you go, "Ah, mush, mush, mush." If there was something wrong, you go, "Ah, Jesus, mush." Everything was just ended in mush.
And another time, it's such a great word to use to identify people in a large area as well. I remember being up doing Christmas shopping up in Jervis one Christmas and be absolutely thronged up there, be standing room only, and I was walking down, there's people everywhere, and I just heard this, "Well, Mush," in the crowd, and I was like, Jesus, who's that? They were definitely from Birr, so I kind of turned around, couldn't see who it was anyway, looked around again, shouted again, "Well, Mush," turned around again, who was it only? It was Red Cooney from Birr there, he'd used the word the whole time, but amongst thousands of people, I was able to identify someone from Birr, and he was able to identify me just by using one word, which I thought was gas, like. And it's so localised, as in no one else would say it. I haven't heard anyone else really. You know, people bring the word around, maybe and use it every now and then in other areas, but it's Birr, like it's a Birr word. You know what I mean? It's gas, like.
It does grate my nerves a bit when you hear too much, though. You kind of go, oh, give us a break. Call me by my proper name. Peasant.